The exiled man's fingers clenched the jagged edge of the shattered hull fragment, knuckles whitening as the bone-crushing Nebula Titan's lethal energy crackled ominously around him. Come on," he muttered under his breath, voice hoarse but fierce, eyes darting between the volatile void and the twisted metal tether, anchoring him to his dying ship. The nebula's crushing forces weren't just a threat, they were a sentence, a slow and inevitable death. Yet, despite the relentless pressure squeezing the very air from his lungs, his mind refused to surrender. He was called Kale Draven, a name whispered with a mixture of respect and frustration among the remnants of the Alliance. Forces he once led, an elite strategist known for his cold calculation and unyielding will to survive. But now, cast out by the very government he'd bled for. Branded a traitor for defying orders that would have condemned entire colonies, he floated alone, tethered to the debris of his ship, staring into the abyss. His breath came in shallow bursts inside his helmet, the recycled air tasting stale, a cruel reminder of time slipping away. "I didn't come here to die," Kale said aloud, voice barely audible over the faint hum of his failing suit systems. "Not like this, not alone." His words echoed in the empty void around him, swallowed by the nebula's eerie silence. Memories assaulted him relentlessly, faces of comrades lost, orders disobeyed, the price of rebellion. His jaw clenched as a surge of anger flared. Damn them, they sent me here to perish, left me to rot in this god-forsaken place. His eyes scanned the swirling energy of the bone-crushing Nebula Titan, where tendrils of cosmic force twisted and gnawed at the metal wreckage, threatening to tear it apart. Suddenly, a faint glow caught his eye, a shimmering outline against the dark emptiness. His gaze locked onto the colossal carcass of a fallen alien leviathan, suspended silently in the nebula's grasp. Its massive form, illuminated by bioluminescent veins pulsing weakly, seemed impossibly still yet strangely alive in its death. A flicker of hope sparked within Kale's chest, a fragile ember amid the crushing void. He shifted his weight, limbs aching from hours of weightless strain, and reached carefully toward the tether's control panel. His fingers trembled, every movement felt like a gamble. "If I can reach that leviathan," he whispered, voice cracking with desperate resolve. Maybe there's something there." Kale's mind raced through possibilities, scavenging parts. Finding shelter from the nebula's energy surges, or using the Leviathan's remains as a shield against the crushing forces. The alien creature's anatomy was unlike anything human science had fully understood. But survival demanded risk. He exhaled sharply, trying to steady his nerves. "All right, old friend," he murmured, a faint smirk tugging at his lips despite the dire circumstances. "Let's see if you're my ticket out of here." The tether creaked ominously as Kale activated the thrusters embedded in his suit, propelling himself slowly toward the Leviathan's glowing form. The nebula's energy crackled louder now, a warning and a countdown. Dust and debris swirled around him, shadows dancing in the unholy light. His thoughts drifted briefly to the past, the missions, the betrayals, the scars etched into his flesh and soul. "I didn't want this exile," he reflected bitterly. "But maybe, just maybe, this is where I find my redemption." As Kale reached the Leviathan's massive ribcage, he hooked his tether to a sturdy bone-like protrusion, securing himself. The carcass emitted faint pulses of energy, almost like a heartbeat in the silence. He pressed his palm to the creature's bioluminescent skin, feeling a strange warmth despite the cold void. Suddenly, his helmet radio crackled, a weak, garbled transmission. "Kale, do you read me?" The voice was faint, distorted by the nebula's interference. "Lyra, is that you?" he gasped, heart pounding. Lyra was his former second-in-command, the one person who never gave up on him. How did you find me?" "We never stopped searching," she replied, urgency lacing her tone. The government's hunting you, but I have a plan. Can you hold on? Kale swallowed hard, fighting back exhaustion. I will, but I'm running out of time. The radio went silent again, leaving him alone with the Leviathan's glowing carcass and the crushing nebula. Yet in that oppressive solitude, a fragile thread of hope wove through the darkness, a promise that survival was still possible even in the heart of annihilation. Kale closed his eyes briefly, drawing strength from that hope. Let's survive this, he whispered, for all those who can't. The void shimmered violently, but he was no longer just a man condemned. He was a survivor, relentless, defiant, and ready to face whatever the bone-crushing Nebula Titan hurled at him next. Kale's breath hitched sharply as a sudden tremor rippled through the void. The faint glow of the alien Leviathan's carcass flickered under the bone-crushing pressure of the nebula. But this time, the subtle vibration wasn't from the nebula's natural fury. No, it was something far more sinister. His sensors, battered and barely functional, pinged a warning that sent icy fingers down his spine. Hostiles, Kale muttered, voice barely more than a rasp. The cold dread that settled in his gut was familiar, the kind that clung to a soldier's bones when the enemy closed in. But this was no ordinary foe. These were the remnants of a merciless alien species, hunters of this sector. Their reputation whispered with fear across the stars. They were the last thing Kale wanted to encounter, especially now. He scanned the swirling energy around the Leviathan's remains, eyes narrowing. The nebula's crushing forces pressed relentlessly against his suit, the sensation like being squeezed in an invisible vice. Yet the alien patrols were the immediate threat. If they found him drifting in the wreckage, stranded and vulnerable, they would not hesitate. Come on, he hissed, fingers fumbling to activate the salvage scanner embedded in his gauntlet. His movements were slow, every muscle screaming against the strain of weightlessness and exhaustion. The scanner beeped faintly, confirming the presence of usable materials within the Leviathan's decayed form. Kale's mind raced. Survival wasn't just about holding on anymore. It required action, cunning, and sacrifice. The alien Leviathan's bioluminescent veins pulsed weakly, and among the decayed tissue lay remnants of advanced biotech, potentially powerful enough to repair his failing systems, or even turn the tide against his hunters. Yet the pressure was mounting. His suit's HUD flickered with warnings, structural integrity compromised, oxygen reserves dwindling. The crushing nebula was a slow killer, but the hostile patrols were a swift one. He had to move fast. Kale's status, the crackling voice of Lyra broke through the radio once again, sharp and urgent. He swallowed the lump rising in his throat. I'm okay for now. But I'm scavenging what I can. The nebula's crushing me, and those patrols are closing in. We don't have much time, Lyra warned. They're scanning for your signature. If you don't move, they'll find you. Kale's jaw clenched. I know. I'm trying to jury-rig a shield from the Leviathan's bioarmor. If I can withstand the storm's pulse and the patrol's weapons, maybe I can slip through. Be careful, Lyra cautioned. Don't take unnecessary risks. He didn't respond. Risks were the only path left. With painstaking care, Kale maneuvered to the exposed ribcage of the alien behemoth. The bones were immense, glowing faintly with residual energy, their surface slick with alien tissue that shimmered under the nebula's eerie light. He pressed his gloved hand against the bioarmor, feeling a strange, almost electric warmth that contrasted with the cold vacuum around him. The salvage scanner beeped again, this time more urgently. Pockets of bioenergy nodes and structural fibers lay embedded within the ribcage, ripe for extraction. Kale's fingers worked quickly, tools whirring softly as he detached a cluster of nodes, careful not to damage the fragile network. Each piece he salvaged was a lifeline, a chance to patch up his suit's failing energy matrix. But as he worked, the faint tremors in the void grew stronger, rhythmic and purposeful. Kale's heart pounded. Not just patrols, they're coordinating, he muttered, sweat beading beneath his helmet despite the cold. The nebula's storm was intensifying, the weaponized pulses growing closer, each crackle a death sentence for the unprotected. His visor flickered, displaying a red alert, weaponized nebula storm imminent. Damn it, he cursed under his breath. The storm's pulse wasn't just energy, it was a natural weapon. A cosmic tempest honed over millennia to obliterate anything caught in its path. Human technology was ill-equipped to handle such fury, and the alien patrols had adapted to exploit it. Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed through the carcass. The Leviathan's remains shifted, as if stirred by the approaching storm. Kale stumbled, grasping the ribcage for balance. The bioluminescent veins flared violently, casting grotesque shadows against his suit. "Stay steady, Kale," he whispered to himself, swallowing the rising panic. His mind flashed back to the lives lost under his command, the colonies sacrificed, the friends betrayed, the alliances shattered. Guilt gnawed at him like a relentless parasite, but he forced it down. Survival came first. Revenge would come later. He glanced at the tether securing him to the wreckage. The line was frayed, strained against the nebula's crushing force. If it snapped, he'd be lost, adrift in a death sentence. A sudden blip lit up his HUD, an approaching patrol ship, sleek and menacing, its sensors sweeping the area with ruthless precision. "They're here," Kale said aloud, voice tight. His fingers worked faster, attaching the salvaged bionodes to his suit's energy matrix. The suit flickered and hummed, a sign of life returning to its systems. The bioarmor began to glow faintly, creating a fragile shield against the nebula's pulses. "Good enough," he muttered, heart hammering. The patrol ship closed in, a dark silhouette against the nebula's glowing tendrils. Kale's thrusters engaged, propelling him away from the Leviathan's ribcage toward a cluster of debris, twisted metal and jagged shards from his destroyed ship. "Come on, Kale," he whispered. "You've got one shot." His suit's enhanced shield absorbed the first pulse of the weaponized nebula storm, a roaring wave of energy that would have shredded an unprotected suit. The shield flickered but held. Behind him, the patrol ship unleashed a volley of plasma bolts. Kale twisted in zero-G, dodging the deadly projectiles. His breath ragged inside his helmet. "Why are you here?" A distorted voice crackled through his comms, alien and cold. Kale gritted his teeth, fingers tightening around his makeshift weapon, a jury-rigged plasma cutter salvaged moments ago. "Because I refuse to die here," he snarled. "Because the Alliance betrayed me and I will have my revenge." The alien's laugh was chilling, a sound devoid of humor. "We will end you, human. The nebula is ours." Kale's mind sharpened. He was outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered, but he had something they didn't: sheer will. He darted toward a narrow crevice in the debris field, using the terrain to mask his movements. The patrol's sensors pinged, scanning for heat signatures, but the bioarmor's adaptive shielding baffled their systems. "Almost there," Kale muttered, diving into the shadowed gap. His suit hissed as it absorbed another pulse from the nebula storm, the energy threatening to overload his systems. Suddenly, his radio sparked to life, Lyra's voice, urgent and clear. "Kale, there's a safe zone ahead, a relic station shielded from the nebula's worst. I'm sending coordinates. You have to make it." His heart surged with a flicker of hope. "I'm not giving up," he said, voice steady despite exhaustion. "Not yet." With renewed determination, Kale surged forward, weaving through the debris. The twin threats of alien hunters and the relentless nebula storm pressing close behind. Every breath was a battle, every movement a gamble between life and death. As the weaponized nebula storm crashed around him, as plasma bolts seared the void. Kale Draven was no longer just a man condemned to die in exile. He was a force of nature, unyielding, driven by guilt, survival, and the burning embers of revenge. The void whispered its deadly secrets, but Kale was listening, not to surrender but to strike back. Kale's grip tightened around the jagged bone fragment, his knuckles whitening as the swarm of alien drones descended upon him. The sudden hiss of their engines cut through the eerie silence of the nebula like a razor, sharp and unforgiving. "Not today," Kale muttered, voice low and steady, a spark of defiance igniting in his eyes. He barely had time to think. The drones were upon him in a blur of metallic limbs and glowing weaponry. His heart pounded, adrenaline flooding his veins as he instinctively scanned the debris field for anything he could use. The alien leviathan's massive bones lay scattered, some fractured, others intact. Their surfaces a bizarre blend of organic and crystalline textures. Kale's fingers found a shard of crystalline bone, sharp and strong. He fashioned a crude trap, wedging the shard into a loop of twisted metal from his ship's wreckage, creating a snare rigged to trigger with the drone's approach. Come on," he breathed, crouching low, muscles coiled like a predator's. The first drone swooped in, its multifaceted eyes glinting with lethal intent. Kale waited, barely daring to blink, as the drone crossed the snare's trigger point. A sharp snap echoed through the void, a cable tightened, jerking the drone off course. It crashed against a bone pillar with a sickening crunch, sparks flying. A grim smile tugged at Kale's lips. "That's one." He barely paused, setting another trap with methodical precision. Every movement a testament to his desperate resourcefulness. The drones pressed their attack, relentless and precise. But Kale's traps held. One by one, the enemy machines faltered, tangled and disabled by the alien debris. Yet even in victory, a colder war raged inside him. His breath came ragged, chest heaving beneath his suit. "Why trust my instincts?" he whispered bitterly, voice cracked with doubt. The memory of betrayal, the cold, cutting betrayal of his own people, gnawed at his resolve. Could he rely on the same instincts that had led him into exile? His mind flashed to the moment the Alliance's orders had come, orders that would have sacrificed innocent colonies. And his defiance that branded him a traitor. Was he a hero or a fool? The scars of that choice were fresh beneath his skin. Invisible but burning all the same. The fight wasn't just physical, it was a battle for his sanity. A war against the isolation that threatened to swallow him whole. Alone in the crushing nebula, surrounded by the silent bones of creatures long dead, Kale felt the sting of loneliness sharpen. He crouched beside a fractured rib, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a gloved hand. "I can't do this alone," he admitted softly, eyes closing for a brief moment. But the nebula offered no mercy, no allies, only the cold calculus of survival. Hours later, Kale stood before the skeletal remains of the colossal leviathan. Its bioluminescent veins dim, but still pulsing with faint life. The bones towered like ancient sentinels, crystalline shards catching the nebula's eerie light. With painstaking care, he began to construct a fortress, a fragile sanctuary amid the chaos. Using fragments of bone fused with the twisted hull of his ship, he pieced together barricades and shields. Weaving bioenergy conduits scavenged from the Leviathan's remains into a defensive matrix. "Almost done," he muttered, voice tired but determined. "This has to hold, at least until the storm passes." But then the nebula stirred. At first it was a subtle tremor, a whisper in the void. Then it grew, a violent, howling tempest of cosmic energy sweeping through the debris field. The weaponized nebula storm was upon him, a devastating force capable of obliterating any weakness. Kale's eyes widened as the swirling tendrils of energy, lashed toward his makeshift fortress. "No, not now," he shouted, thrusters firing to steady his position against the crushing gusts. The fortress trembled, bones cracking, crystalline structures fracturing under the relentless assault. "Hold together," Kale urged aloud, desperation threading his voice. "You're all I've got." As the storm intensified, he was forced to dive into the shelter he'd built. Pressing his back against the alien bioarmor, feeling its strange warmth against his suit. The crystalline bones shimmered, casting fractured light across his visor. Outside, the nebula's fury roared like a living beast, a pulse of destruction that threatened to unravel everything. His comm crackled, a distorted voice cutting through the storm's howl. "Kale status," Lyra's voice sharp with concern. "Fortress under siege," he replied, voice strained. "The storm's worse than I thought. This place might not hold." "Keep holding," she urged. "Help is on the way. You're not alone in this." Her words were a lifeline, a fragile thread pulling him back from the edge of despair. Kale's fingers clenched, determination hardening. "I won't let this storm be the end." Suddenly, the fortress shuddered violently. The bones groaned, some shards snapping free and spinning into the void. A massive pulse struck, and Kale was thrown back, crashing into the jagged hull remnants. Pain flared through his body, but he forced himself up, breath ragged. The storm was more than a natural disaster. It was a weapon. Honed by the nebula's ancient forces, and exploited by the alien hunters who sought dominion over this sector. Kale's makeshift fortress was fragile, but it was his last stand. With grim resolve, he scrambled back to reinforce his defenses, weaving salvaged bioenergy nodes into the matrix. Each connection hummed with a tenuous power, a lifeline holding back the abyss. As the storm raged outside, Kale's mind raced. He could feel the weight of his past, betrayals, losses, the ghosts of those he failed. But beneath it all burned a fierce flame of resolve. "I'm not done yet," he whispered fiercely. "Not while there's breath in my lungs." The nebula's storm battered the fortress, relentless and unforgiving. But Kale fought, not just against the storm, but against the crushing tide of isolation and doubt. Every moment was a battle, every breath a defiance. In the heart of the bone-crushing Nebula Titan, amid the ruins of alien giants and shattered hopes, Kale Draven carved out a fragile sanctuary, a fortress born of desperation and willpower. And as the storm threatened to tear him apart, he stood unyielding, a solitary warrior poised to face annihilation and emerge. Somehow still alive, Kale's breath hitched as the nebula's fury intensified. The howling tempest battering his bone fortress with merciless force. Outside, tendrils of iridescent energy whipped through the void like spectral whips, lashing the crystalline walls, sending shards spinning into the darkness. "Hold, hold," Kale growled, sweat beading beneath his helmet as he hammered a jagged bone fragment into place, his fingers trembling but unyielding. The crushing pressure of the bone-crushing Nebula Titan was no longer just an environmental hazard. It had become a weapon. A living storm that sought to tear apart anything daring enough to resist. And Kale Draven was standing at its eye, defying annihilation itself. His mind raced, heart pounding in a chaotic rhythm that matched the tempest. Abandon the fortress, retreat into the void, the thought flashed and died instantly. This sanctuary, fragile and battered though it was, represented hope. A symbol of defiance against those who had cast him out. A last stand against the alien hunters who closed in like vultures. "Come on, Kale," he whispered fiercely. "You've got to turn this nightmare into your weapon." The nebula's energy pulsed again, a wave of destructive power cascading toward the fortress. Kale activated the bioenergy conduits he'd salvaged from the Leviathan's remains. The glowing veins along the bone walls flickered and surged with renewed life, channeling the storm's raw power into a chaotic shield. The fortress shuddered but held. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the debris, a warning. Kale's eyes snapped toward the void as a fleet of alien warships emerged from the swirling haze. Their hulls gleaming with deadly intent, the warlord had arrived. The alien warlord's flagship loomed like a dark god among the stars, its engines roaring a challenge as it pierced the nebula's veil. Its message was clear: claim the nebula, destroy the human threat. Kale's breath hitched. The stakes had never been higher. Lyra, he rasped into his comm, voice strained but resolute. They're here, the warlord himself. Hold on, Kale, Lyra's voice crackled back, steady and urgent. Reinforcements are en route, but you're on your own for now. A grim smile tugged at Kale's lips. As always, he floated to the edge of his bone fortress, eyes scanning the approaching enemy ships. The alien drones swarmed like locusts, their weapons blazing, relentless in their assault. Kale's fingers danced over his control panel, activating the traps and defenses he'd painstakingly rigged from the Leviathan's remains and ship debris. Crystalline bone shards snapped into place like deadly pincers. Energy nets shimmered in the void, and bioenergy pulses radiated from his makeshift batteries. We're not just going to survive this, Kale muttered, voice low and fierce. We're going to make them pay. The first wave of enemy fighters dove in, plasma cannons blazing. Kale's guerrilla tactics sprang to life. Using the nebula's chaotic energy, he lured the ships into unstable energy pockets, where bursts of raw nebula power crippled their systems. Now, Kale shouted to no one but the void, twisting his thrusters to dodge a hail of plasma bolts. His suit's bioarmor absorbed a searing blast, flickering but holding. His heart pounded through his chest as he engaged in a deadly dance with the alien assault. Each strike, each trap, each desperate maneuver was a calculated risk, a gamble between annihilation and survival. Drones incoming starboard, Kale barked, eyes sharp as he slashed a plasma cutter through a wave of mechanical limbs. The alien warlord's voice crackled over the comm, cold and mocking. You cannot hide in a graveyard, human. The nebula belongs to us. Kale's jaw clenched. This graveyard is my fortress now. And you'll regret underestimating it. The battle escalated. Energy pulses from the nebula surged unpredictably, turning the battlefield into a shifting maze of death. Kale exploited every fluctuation, timing his attacks with the storm's rhythms, using its destructive power as both shield and sword. But the enemy numbers were overwhelming. His fortress groaned under the relentless assault. Cracks spiderwebbing through the crystalline bones. Kale's breath was ragged, fatigue gnawing at his limbs and mind. The crushing pressure of the nebula wasn't just physical, it was a weight on his sanity. Every moment stretched thin the fragile barrier between resolve and despair. A sudden explosion rocked the fortress, sending shards scattering like deadly stars. Kale was thrown against the bioarmor wall, pain flaring through his side. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself up, voice hoarse but defiant. Not yet, not here. The alien warlord's flagship descended, unleashing a devastating energy beam that ripped through the outer walls. The fortress trembled, the ancient bones cracking ominously. Kale's comm flickered, Lyra's voice breaking through the static. Kale, you have to evacuate. The fleet is closing in. You can't hold them all. He shook his head, a fire igniting in his eyes. This is my stand. With grim determination, Kale initiated the final phase of his plan. He keyed a sequence into his suit's control panel. The bioenergy conduits would overload, triggering a cataclysmic detonation, powered by the nebula's own energy. His voice was steady but heavy. If I can't defeat them, I'll take this place with me. A bitter smile touched his lips as he contacted the warlord one last time. You want the nebula, then come claim it. The warlord's response was a sneer. Foolish human, Kale's fingers flew, activating the overload. The fortress's bones glowed brighter, pulsing with deadly energy. The nebula around him seemed to roar in anticipation, its destructive power harnessed at last. As the countdown ticked down, Kale's thoughts flickered to Lyra, to the colonies lost, to the betrayal that had cast him into exile. This is for them, for all of us. The alien fleet closed in, oblivious to the cataclysm awaiting them. Kale held his ground, heart pounding like a war drum against the void. In the final seconds, a torrent of emotion surged, a blend of rage, sorrow, and unbreakable will. "Burn with me," Kale whispered, eyes blazing. The fortress erupted in a storm of light and energy. A supernova born from bone and nebula fury. The explosion rippled through space, tearing apart enemy ships, scattering the warlord's fleet like shattered glass. When the light faded, silence hung heavy. Kale's suit drifted, battered but intact amidst the wreckage. His breath was shallow, body bruised, mind teetering on the edge. But he had transformed exile into defiance. The bone-crushing Nebula Titan was no longer a sentence but a battleground. Where he had fought, where he had won. In the aftermath, as debris floated in the stillness, Kale whispered to the void, "This is just the beginning." His voice echoed through the silence, a promise forged in bone and fire. A testament to survival against impossible odds. Kale's lungs burned with every ragged breath as he drifted among the shattered remnants of his bone fortress, the once towering walls, forged from the alien Leviathan's crystalline bones and reinforced with bioenergy conduits, now lay fractured and smoldering, torn apart by the cataclysm he had unleashed. Yet despite the ruin around him, Kale still clung to life, a fragile spark flickering in the crushing void of the bone-crushing Nebula Titan. His suit systems groaned under the strain, warning lights flickering like dying stars across his HUD. Pain radiated from bruises and broken ribs, each movement a harsh reminder of his body's limits. But it was the weight in his chest, the ache of solitude, loss, and sacrifice, that pressed down hardest. "Worth it," Kale muttered hoarsely, voice barely audible over the faint hiss of his suit's life support. Had to be. The explosion, the final gambit, had been his last desperate act. By channeling the core energy of the nebula through the fortress's bioenergy matrix, he had detonated a storm of raw cosmic power. The shockwave had shredded the alien warlord's fleet, scattering their ships like brittle bones tossed on a cosmic pyre. For the first time in months, the oppressive silence of the nebula felt less like a tomb and more like a battleground one. Yet victory had come at a cost that gnawed at Kale's spirit. He thought of Lyra, her voice crackling through the static, urging him to hold on, to keep fighting. She had risked everything to find him, to remind him he was not alone. But now, miles away, her presence was a ghost in the void. He whispered her name, craving connection in the endless emptiness. "I'm still here, Lyra," he said, his voice raw with exhaustion. Still breathing. The nebula's swirling tendrils of iridescent energy rippled around him, like spectral fingers reaching out, mocking, tempting, and yet strangely comforting. Kale flexed his fingers, feeling the faint hum of his suit's bioarmor clinging stubbornly to life. The fortress had shattered, but he had survived. More than survived, he had transformed exile into legend. His mind wandered back to the moment of decision, the searing instant when he had chosen to trap the nebula's core. Energy within the fortress. He remembered the fierce clarity of that choice. Sacrifice himself so that the enemy's advance would be broken. The knowledge that his own life hung by a thread made the act both terrifying and necessary. "I'm the shield now," he thought grimly, "the final barrier." His hands trembled as he reached out to steady himself on a jagged shard of bone. The cold energy radiating from the nebula ward, with the warmth of the Leviathan's bioenergy, still faintly pulsing in the debris. It was a cruel paradox. The same force that threatened to crush him also gave him strength. Cale's breath caught as a sudden tremor rippled through the void. For a moment, he feared another assault, another wave of alien hunters returning to feast on his ruin. But the nebula remained eerily silent. "Quiet," he whispered, scanning his sensors for any sign of movement. Too quiet. He allowed himself a fleeting smile, a grim acknowledgement that the enemy had been shattered. Their fleet broken and scattered. The alien warlord's threat had receded, at least for now. Yet Cale's solitude was a double-edged sword. The silence was a reminder of what he had lost, his comrades, his home. The fragile bonds that had once tethered him to humanity. He swallowed hard, fighting the sting of tears that threatened beneath his helmet. "This exile," he said softly, "it's forged me into something else. Not just a man cast out, but a legend, the human who turned death itself into a fortress." His voice cracked, a rare vulnerability slipping through the stoic facade he had worn for so long. In the endless void, Cale drifted, memories and regrets swirling like the nebula around him. The faces of those he had lost flickered in his mind, the fallen colonies, the friends betrayed by the Alliance's cold calculus, the price of defiance. Yet amid that storm of grief, a stubborn flame burned, resilience. He clenched his fists, the faint hum of his suit systems a lifeline in the crushing darkness. "I'm not done," he vowed, "not while there's breath in me." The nebula shifted, cosmic winds tugging at his body, but Cale's will was unyielding. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a sentinel standing guard at humanity's frontier. His thoughts turned to the vast expanse beyond the nebula's grasp, the colonies still out there, fragile and vulnerable. The alien threat, though shattered, would one day return. But Cale was ready. "I'll defend this void," he declared, voice steady despite the ache. "I'll be the bulwark against the darkness." A sudden flicker on his HUD caught his attention, a faint transmission beacon. Weak but alive, Cale's heart quickened. "Lyra," he whispered, hope threading through his weariness. "Are you out there?" Static hissed, then a faint voice emerged, distant but unmistakable. "Cale, you made it." Lyra's tone was weary but warm. "We're regrouping. The Alliance hasn't forgotten you." "Not now." Relief washed over him, a balm to his fractured soul. "I'm still here, still fighting." They shared a long silence, connection stretching across the void. "Your sacrifice," Lyra began, voice thick with emotion, "it saved countless lives. You turned the nebula into a fortress not just of bone, but of hope." Cale's gaze drifted out into the swirling cosmic storm. "Hope," he mused. "In the bleakest shadows, it's all we have." His suit systems beeped softly, signaling stabilizing oxygen levels and power reserves. The fighting might be over for now, but the war for the nebula's heart had only just begun. Cale closed his eyes briefly, drawing strength from the promise of tomorrow. "I'm not alone," he said, voice of vow, "and I'll face whatever comes next." The bone-crushing Nebula Titan loomed vast and cruel around him, a cosmic crucible that had forged a legend from exile and despair. As the ruins of the fortress drifted silently in the void, Cale Draven floated amidst the wreckage, battered, haunted, but alive. A sentinel of humanity's frontier, standing resolute against the cosmic darkness. And in the endless night, his whispered words echoed, an anthem of resilience, redemption, and the indomitable human spirit. "This is not the end," he said. "It's only the beginning."